the massive doors of Battle Station. Omega-7 opened with a loud hiss that echoed through the loading bay. Daeho stepped off the transport ship carrying only a small black bag in his right hand. The uniform he wore looked too big for his thin body, and the sleeves hung loose around his arms. He was 22 years old, but his face made him look even younger than most new soldiers who came to train at the station. The loading bay stretched out like a small city with metal walls that reached up so high the ceiling disappeared into shadows. Cargo containers were stacked everywhere, and alien workers moved between them like colorful ants. Some had blue skin and stood 8 feet tall, while others had green scales and moved on 4 legs. There were even tiny purple creatures that floated in the air using small machines attached to their backs. All the activity in the bay stopped when Daeho walked down the ramp from his transport ship. Dozens of alien soldiers turned to stare at him. Some had never seen a human before, and others had only heard stories about the strange creatures from the planet called Earth. The whispers started immediately spreading from one group to another like water flowing downhill near a stack of weapon crates. 3 Vortani soldiers stood talking in their deep voices that sounded like distant thunder. These warriors had bright blue skin that looked like polished metal, and their bodies were built like living tanks. Each one was twice as wide as Daeho, and their arms were thicker than his entire body. Their 4 eyes moved independently as they studied the human newcomer with obvious disappointment. One of the Vortani shook his massive head and spoke to his companions in their native language, but loud enough for others to hear. His words roughly translated to doubt about whether such a small, weak-looking creature could survive even basic training, let alone real combat. The others nodded in agreement, making sounds that might have been laughter if humans could understand Vortani humor. On the other side of the bay, a group of Kelrak soldiers watched with different expressions. These reptilian beings stood about 6 feet tall with sleek green scales that caught the artificial light like emeralds. Their movements were quick and precise like hunting cats, and their yellow eyes missed nothing. They were famous throughout the galaxy for their incredible speed and deadly accuracy in battle. The leader of the Kelrax group hissed softly to his teammates, his forked tongue flicked out to taste the air as he studied Daeho from across the loading bay. The reptilian soldiers were known for their pride in physical superiority, and the small human looked like easy prey to their predator instincts. One of them made a gesture that clearly meant the newcomer would not last long in their world. Even the Pixian engineers, who usually minded their own business, stopped their work to look at the human. These small creatures stood only 4 feet tall, with purple skin and heads that seemed too large for their tiny bodies. But their intelligence was legendary, and their technology kept the entire galactic military running. They clustered together near their floating work platforms, chittering in high-pitched voices about the biological limitations they observed in human anatomy. The sound of heavy boots on metal flooring announced the arrival of Sergeant Talo. Before anyone could see him, this massive Vortani warrior was even larger than the soldiers near the weapon crates, and his body was covered with scars that told stories of countless battles. His uniform was stretched tight across muscles that could crush steel, and his 4 eyes glowed with the intensity of someone who had seen too much combat. Sergeant Talo walked directly toward Daeho with steps that shook the floor beneath his feet. The human stood perfectly still as the giant alien approached, towering over him like a building. The sergeant carried a data pad in one hand that looked like a toy in his massive grip, and his expression showed the kind of professional skepticism that drill instructors throughout the galaxy had perfected over centuries. When Talo spoke, his voice boomed across the entire loading bay, causing some of the smaller aliens to cover their ears. The sergeant introduced himself as the primary training instructor for new recruits and explained that he had been ordered to accept human soldiers into the program as part of an experimental exchange between Earth and the Galactic Defense Force. However, Talo made it very clear that he personally doubted the wisdom of this decision. His 4 eyes studied Daeho from head to toe, taking in every detail of the human's appearance. The sergeant mentioned that many officers in the command structure believed humans were too physically weak and mentally slow to contribute anything meaningful to galactic military operations. The watching aliens nodded their heads or made their species equivalent gestures of agreement. Some began making quiet bets about how many days The human would last before requesting transfer back to his home planet. Others wondered aloud whether humans could even survive the atmospheric conditions and artificial gravity that other species took for granted. Eho listened to all of this without changing his expression. He simply nodded once to show he understood and waited for further instructions. His calm reaction seemed to puzzle some of the observers who expected him to argue or show signs of anger at the obvious insults. Most new recruits, regardless of their species, would have said something to defend their honor or capabilities. Sergeant Tallow gestured for the human to follow him toward the exit that led deeper into the station. As they walked through the loading bay, other soldiers continued to make comments about Daeho's size and appearance. Some laughed openly, while others made jokes in their native languages that needed no translation to understand their meaning. The corridor beyond the loading bay was wide enough for 6 Vortani to walk side by side, and the walls were lined with windows that showed the endless darkness of space dotted with distant stars. Transport vehicles moved along tracks built into the ceiling, carrying supplies and personnel to different sections of the massive station. Along the way, Sergeant Tallow explained the basic structure of Battle Station Omega 7, which served as the primary training facility for the Galactic Defense Force. The station was home to over 50,000 military personnel from dozens of different worlds and species. Each group brought their own strengths and traditions to create a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The sergeant also mentioned that humans had been accepted into the program because Earth's government had requested membership in the galactic community. However, many alien leaders viewed this as charity rather than recognizing any real value that humans might contribute to their military forces. The implication was clear that Daeho would need to prove himself worthy of being there. As they walked through the corridors, other soldiers they passed stopped their conversations to stare at the human. Some pointed and whispered, while others made gestures that were clearly not friendly. A few younger aliens even followed them for short distances, wanting to get a closer look at the strange newcomer from the primitive planet called Earth. The barracks section of the station contained thousands of sleeping quarters arranged in neat rows along multiple levels. Each room housed between 4 and 8 soldiers, depending on their species' size requirements. The air smelled like a mixture of different alien atmospheres and cleaning chemicals that kept the environment safe for everyone. Sergeant Tallow led Daeho to a room on the 3rd level and explained that he would be sharing the space with 7 other recruits. The sergeant handed him a data pad containing schedule information, rules and regulations, and a map of the station. Then he left without another word, his heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor as he moved on to other duties inside the barracks room. Daeho found his assigned bunk bed, which was the bottom level of a stack designed for smaller species. The mattress was thin but clean, and there was a small locker for personal belongings. None of his new roommates were present, so he unpacked his few possessions in silence, wondering what challenges tomorrow would bring to this strange new world. The alarm that woke everyone in the barracks sounded like a dying wail mixed with metal scraping against stone. Daeho opened his eyes and saw that the other bunks were already empty. His roommates had left without waking him, which meant he would have to figure out where to go by himself. The datapad showed he had exactly 4 minutes to reach the main training hall. He grabbed his gear and ran through the corridors, following signs that pointed toward the training areas. Other recruits were also hurrying in the same direction, but they moved in groups while talking and laughing together when they saw Daeho running alone behind them. Some of them slowed down and made comments about humans being naturally late and disorganized. The main training hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high it had its own weather system. Small clouds actually formed near the top, where warm air from the floor met the cooler atmosphere above. The space was filled with equipment designed for different alien body types, including climbing walls that reached impossible heights and obstacle courses that seemed to go on forever. Sergeant Tallow stood in the center of the hall, holding his datapad and surrounded by about 200 recruits from various species. The massive Vortani instructor began explaining the day's activities, which would test their basic combat abilities, physical fitness levels, and weapon handling skills. His voice echoed off the walls as he divided everyone into groups based On their species and experience levels, the first challenge was an obstacle course that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated all living creatures. The course included walls to climb over, barriers to crawl under, ropes to swing across, and targets to hit while moving at full speed. Most sections seemed impossible for normal beings to complete, but the alien recruits approached it with confidence. When the Vortani soldiers took their turn, they charged through the course like living bulldozers. Their incredible strength let them smash through barriers that were supposed to be climbed over, and their thick skin protected them from the rough surfaces that would injure other species. They completed the course in record time, but left a trail of broken equipment behind them. The Kelrax troops used a completely different approach that showed off their natural speed and agility. These reptilian warriors flowed through the obstacles like green lightning, darting between barriers and climbing walls so fast they seemed to defy gravity. Their performance was beautiful to watch as they moved with perfect coordination between their long limbs and flexible spines. The smaller Pixian soldiers struggled with the physical portions of the course since their tiny bodies were not built for climbing or jumping. However, they solved the puzzle sections instantly, using their superior intelligence to find hidden switches and secret passages that other species completely missed. Their approach proved that brains could sometimes overcome the need for muscles. When Deho's name was called, the entire training hall became quiet. Even the instructors stopped their conversations with other groups to watch the human attempt the obstacle course. Some aliens started making bets on whether he would finish, while others wondered if he would get injured trying to keep up with beings who were clearly superior in every physical way. Deho walked to the starting line, slowly taking time to study the layout of the course. His eyes tracked each obstacle, and he seemed to be calculating distances and angles in his head. This careful approach made some of the watching aliens impatient, and they began making comments about human cowardice and overthinking simple challenges. The human began moving through the course at a steady pace that was neither fast nor slow. He was obviously not the strongest competitor, since the barriers that Vortani soldiers smashed through required him to find gaps and openings to squeeze past. He was also not the fastest, since Kelrax warriors had already finished while he was still on the first section. However, something about his movement caught the attention of a few instructors who had seen many recruits attempt this course. Deho moved with unusual efficiency, never wasting energy on unnecessary actions. Instead of forcing his way through barriers, he found weak points and leverage opportunities. Rather than climbing over tall walls, he used momentum and physics to swing himself up with minimal effort. His technique was different from anything the alien instructors had seen before. Most species relied on their natural advantages to overcome obstacles, but the human seemed to be using his brain to find solutions that required less physical ability. The result was that he completed the course in average time, despite having obvious physical limitations compared to other recruits. The weapons training session proved more challenging for Deho, since the standard galactic defense force rifle was designed for larger hands and stronger arms. The weapon was nearly as long as he was tall, and its weight made his arms shake when he tried to aim properly. Most alien recruits handled the rifle easily, but the human struggled just to hold it steady. His first few shots at the practice targets missed completely, sending energy bolts into the walls and ceiling. Some of the watching recruits burst into laughter, while others made jokes about human eyesight and coordination. The sound of their amusement filled the training hall and made it clear that they viewed his performance as entertainment rather than a serious attempt at military training. Corporal Vexay, Kelrax soldier with bright green scales and yellow eyes that gleamed with malicious humor, decided to make himself the leader of the mockery. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear, suggesting that maybe humans should stick to cleaning duties instead of trying to be real soldiers. His comments drew more laughter from recruits, who were happy to have someone else be the target of attention. Other soldiers joined in, creating a chorus of insults and jokes that echoed through the training hall. They made comments about human weakness and questioned whether Earth's military had made a mistake sending such obviously unqualified candidates to represent their species. Some even suggested that Deho should return home before he embarrassed himself further. Throughout all of this mockery, Deho remained silent. He simply adjusted his grip on the rifle and changed his stance slightly before taking more shots at the targets. His face showed no anger or frustration, just quiet concentration. As he tried to adapt to equipment that was not designed for his body type, the lack of emotional reaction seemed to disappoint some aliens who had hoped for a more dramatic response. The training day continued with physical fitness tests that measured strength, speed, and endurance in various combinations. The results were predictable, with each species excelling in areas where their natural biology gave them advantages. Deho performed poorly in most categories, finishing near the bottom of every ranking and providing more ammunition for the aliens who enjoyed mocking his efforts. By evening, when the recruits returned to their barracks, the pattern had been established. Deho was clearly the weakest member of their training group, and his performance had given the other soldiers plenty of material for jokes and insults. The humans seemed destined to become the permanent target of their amusement unless something dramatic changed in the days ahead. However, a few of the more observant aliens had noticed small details about his performance that did not match their assumptions about human capabilities. His movement through the obstacle course had shown tactical thinking that went beyond what most recruits demonstrated. His weapon handling, while initially poor, had improved noticeably by the end of the session, suggesting an ability to adapt quickly to new challenges. These subtle signs meant nothing to most of the alien recruits, who were too busy enjoying their superiority to pay attention to anything that might contradict their assumptions. But for those who were watching carefully, the humans' first day had raised questions that would become more important as training continued. The cafeteria on Battle Station Omega 7 was a massive hall that could feed thousands of soldiers at the same time. Long metal tables stretched across the room in perfect rows, while food dispensers along the walls provided meals designed for dozens of different alien digestive systems. The air was filled with the sounds of conversations in various languages and the clatter of eating utensils. Against metal trays, Deho sat alone at a corner table, eating a meal that looked like colored paste, but tasted better than it appeared. His isolation was not by choice, but because none of the alien recruits wanted to share their space with someone they viewed as weak and inferior. The empty chairs around him served as a clear message that humans were not welcome in their social groups. At nearby tables, groups of alien soldiers told jokes about human frailty while glancing in his direction to make sure he could hear their comments. They created nicknames like Little Earth and Soft Skin that followed him everywhere he went. Some of the more creative aliens made up stories about humans being afraid of their own shadows or needing special equipment just to walk upright. The Vortani soldiers were particularly loud with their insults, since their culture valued strength above all other qualities. They made exaggerated gestures showing how easily they could crush human bones, and wondered aloud whether Earth's military had sent them a child by mistake. Their deep voices carried across the entire cafeteria, ensuring that everyone could enjoy their humor at Deho's expense. The Kelrax troops preferred more subtle forms of mockery that showed off their intelligence along with their cruelty. They made scientific observations about human biological limitations and discussed whether such a primitive species should even be allowed to handle advanced technology. Their yellow eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction whenever their comments made other aliens laugh. Even the normally peaceful Pixian engineers joined in the harassment, though their approach was more analytical than malicious. They calculated the statistical probability of human success in various military scenarios and shared their findings with anyone who would listen. Their conclusions were always negative, which added a scientific authority to the general belief that humans were useless. The physical training sessions continued to be difficult for Deho, as each exercise seemed designed to highlight his weaknesses. Compared to the alien recruits' strength tests that were easy for Vortani warriors, left him struggling to lift half the required weight. Speed trials meant for Kelrax soldiers showed him finishing dead last in every race. Intelligence puzzles created for Pixian minds took him twice as long to solve as the recommended time. Corporal Vex had appointed himself as the leader of the daily harassment campaign, organizing pranks and accidents during training sessions that made Deho's life miserable. The green-scaled Kelrax soldier convinced other recruits to exclude the human from group activities and study sessions. effectively isolating him from any chance to learn from his teammates during weapons practice. Vex would accidentally bump into Deho just as he was taking aim, causing his shots to go wild and providing more evidence of human incompetence. The reptilian soldier also spread rumors that humans smelled bad and carried diseases from their primitive planet, which gave other aliens another reason to avoid contact with the Earth recruit. The harassment reached a new level during urban combat simulation, where recruits had to work in teams to clear hostile forces from a mock city environment. The exercise was designed to test their ability to coordinate different species abilities while accomplishing complex tactical objectives under time pressure. Deho found himself assigned to a team with Vex and 3 other aliens who made it clear they did not want him there. The team leader was a massive Vortani named Krog, whose scarred blue skin told stories of countless training battles. His strategy was simple and direct, which involved charging through obstacles and overwhelming enemies with superior firepower. Krog assigned Deho to rear guard duty, which essentially meant keeping him out of the main action while the others handled the important work. The human was told to watch their backs and call out warnings if enemies approached from behind. It was a job that required no special skills and kept him from interfering with their real combat operations. The team's approach relied heavily on their natural advantages, with each alien using their species' strengths to overcome different challenges. The Vortani soldiers smashed through barriers and absorbed enemy fire, while the Kelrax troops used their speed to flank opponents and strike from unexpected angles. The strategy worked well in simple situations, but failed completely when they faced complex tactical problems. The exercise scenario included civilian hostages that had to be rescued without being harmed, innocent bystanders that had to be protected, and enemy forces that used the environment to their advantage. Most successful teams required careful planning and coordinated execution, but Krog's group preferred the direct approach that relied on overwhelming force. Their tactics led to disaster as they charged into ambush, triggered alarms that brought reinforcements, and caused civilian casualties that resulted in major point deductions. The team finished with one of the worst scores in the entire class, which should have been embarrassing for aliens, who considered themselves naturally superior to humans. However, instead of accepting responsibility for their poor performance, the team members decided to blame Deho for their failure. They claimed that worrying about the weak human had distracted them from their duties and that his presence had slowed down their response times. The accusations were completely unfair, but the other recruits accepted them without question. That evening in the barracks, Vex confronted Deho in front of all their roommates who gathered around to watch the show. The Kelrax soldier suggested that the human should quit training before he got real soldiers killed in actual combat situations. His yellow eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction as he waited for the expected response. Most recruits in similar situations would have either broken down emotionally or fought back with angry words that would have provided more entertainment for the watching aliens. Instead, Deho simply asked Vex a question that surprised everyone in the room. He wanted to know if the Kelrax soldier had ever been in real combat outside of training exercises. The question caught Vex off guard, since most recruits at the station had no actual battle experience beyond what they learned in simulations. They were all preparing for military service, but none had faced genuine life or death situations where their decisions would have real consequences. The reptilian soldier admitted he had never been in combat, but claimed his species had natural warrior instincts that humans obviously lacked. Deho nodded thoughtfully at this response, but did not argue or try to defend himself. The calm reaction frustrated Vex, who had expected either tears or anger that would prove human emotional weakness. Instead, the human simply returned to organizing his gear with the same quiet efficiency he showed in everything else. The other aliens in the barracks began to lose interest in the confrontation, since Deho refused to provide the dramatic reaction they wanted. Some wandered back to their own activities, while others made final insulting comments before settling down for the night. The moment passed without the explosive conclusion that Vex had planned. However, the Kelrax soldier was not finished with his campaign. To break the human spirit, he began planning more elaborate pranks and harassment that would force some kind of emotional response. The reptilian warrior was determined to prove that humans were not only weak, but also mentally unstable when faced with pressure. What Vex did not realize was that his efforts were being noticed by some of the more observant recruits who were starting to question why the human never seemed to break down despite weeks of constant abuse. The puzzle of Deho's unusual resilience was beginning to interest aliens, who were smart enough to recognize that something did not add up about the supposedly weak Earth soldier. Week after week of constant mockery and poor training performance should have broken any normal recruit, but Deho continued showing up early for exercises and staying late for extra practice. His quiet determination puzzled some of the more thoughtful aliens who had expected him to either quit or have an emotional breakdown by now. Instead, the human treated everyone with the same polite respect regardless of how badly they treated him. Private Yuki was a female Pixion engineer with bright purple skin and large dark eyes that missed very few details. Her species was famous for their analytical minds and advanced technology, but she was more interested in solving puzzles than building machines. The mystery of the human recruit had captured her attention because his behavior did not match any logical pattern she could identify during one of her routine equipment inspections. Yuki noticed something odd about Deho's gear that had been bothering her for several days. His military-issued equipment showed signs of modification and wear that suggested experience with similar items. Most new recruits had gear that looked fresh from the supply depot, but the human's equipment had been carefully adjusted and showed signs of regular use. The modifications were subtle but significant to someone who understood military hardware. His rifle had been fitted with a custom grip that matched his smaller hands perfectly, and his body armor showed wear patterns that indicated extensive training with similar equipment. His boots were not the standard issue type given to new recruits, but rather a more expensive model that experienced soldiers often purchased with their own money. Most telling of all, his uniform had faint marks where insignia and patches had been removed, leaving tiny holes and discolored fabric that suggested years of military service. The pattern of missing decorations indicated someone who had earned multiple commendations and unit awards before coming to the Galactic Training Station. These details were invisible to most observers, but Yuki's engineering background made her notice things that others missed. She began watching Deho more carefully during training sessions and noticed other inconsistencies that did not match his supposed rookie status. His movement patterns showed muscle memory for military procedures that took years to develop. His weapon handling, while initially poor, had improved at a rate that suggested previous experience rather than natural learning ability. During meal breaks, Yuki started sitting closer to the human's isolated table where she could observe his behavior without being obvious about her interest. She noticed that he ate quickly and efficiently, like someone accustomed to military field conditions rather than the leisurely pace of most trainees. He also showed situational awareness that kept his eyes moving around the room in patterns that suggested security training. The young Pixian engineer decided to approach Deho directly with her observations rather than continuing to speculate from a distance. She found him in the equipment room after a particularly difficult training session where he had once again finished near the bottom of every performance ranking. The human was cleaning his rifle with practiced movements that contradicted his supposed inexperience. Yuki asked him direct questions about his background, starting with innocent inquiries about Earth's military training programs. The human gave vague answers about coming from his planet's defense forces, but avoided specific details about his previous assignments or the length of his service. His responses were polite but evasive in ways that suggested he was hiding important information. When she pressed for more details about his military experience, Deho simply said that Earth's leaders had chosen him to represent their species in the galactic training program. The answer was technically true but avoided explaining why they would select someone who appeared to be so poorly qualified for such an important mission. Yuki shared her observations with a few other recruits, who had also noticed odd things about the human that did not match his rookie status. A young Vortani named Myra had seen him disassemble and reassemble his weapon in complete darkness during a power outage, which suggested familiarity that went beyond basic training. A Kelrak soldier called Jox had noticed that Deho's tactical suggestions during group exercises were often more sophisticated than those offered by aliens with supposedly superior military backgrounds, however. When these recruits tried to discuss their theories with their teammates, most soldiers dismissed the ideas as wishful thinking. They preferred to believe that humans were simply weak and inexperienced rather than consider the possibility that they might be wrong about the Earth recruit. The mockery and harassment continued as if nothing had changed. The training program moved into more advanced phases that included live-fire exercises with real weapons and ammunition. These sessions took place in specially designed chambers that could simulate various planetary environments in combat scenarios. The danger level increased significantly as recruits learned to work with lethal equipment under realistic conditions during one particularly challenging exercise. The recruits faced a scenario involving hostage rescue in a space station similar to their own training facility. They had to navigate tight corridors filled with automated defenses, neutralize enemy forces without harming innocent civilians, and extract their targets under severe time pressure. The scenario was designed to test everything they had learned about tactics, teamwork, and decision-making under stress. Most teams struggled with the complex requirements of the mission. Either they moved too slowly and failed to save the hostages, or they were too aggressive and caused civilian casualties that resulted in mission failure. The exercise revealed serious gaps in their training as recruits discovered that real combat situations required much better judgment and precision than simple target practice. The instructors expressed disappointment with the overall performance, noting that actual military operations would require soldiers to make split-second decisions that balanced mission objectives with protecting innocent lives. Many of the alien recruits had relied too heavily on their natural advantages without developing the tactical thinking needed for complex scenarios. When Deho's team entered the simulation chamber, Vex once again assigned him to a minimal role that would keep him away from the main action. The Kelrax leader had learned nothing from their previous failures and continued to believe that excluding the human would improve their chances of success. However, this time Deho made several suggestions about approach routes, timing, and communication protocols that demonstrated tactical knowledge far beyond what was taught in their basic classes. His recommendations were based on real-world experience with similar missions, but his teammates ignored his advice and proceeded with their original plan. The team's approach quickly led to disaster as they triggered security alarms, brought down overwhelming enemy response, and failed to coordinate their movements effectively. They repeated the same mistakes that had caused problems in previous exercises, but seemed incapable of learning from their failure. As Deho watched from his assigned position as his teammates stumbled through the mission, making tactical errors that any experienced soldier would have avoided. The human could have easily taken control of the situation and led them to success, but his cover identity as a rookie recruit prevented him from revealing his true capabilities. The exercise ended in complete failure with multiple civilian casualties, and none of the hostages successfully rescued. Vex and his team emerged from the simulation chamber, looking embarrassed and frustrated, while other recruits shook their heads at their poor performance. The Kelrax soldier was beginning to realize that his natural arrogance might be causing problems, but he was too proud to admit his mistakes or ask for help from the supposedly inferior human. As the training program moved toward its final phases, the mystery of Deho's true background became more intriguing to the few aliens who were paying attention. The human's quiet competence and unusual resilience suggested depths that contradicted everything they had been told about his species. Soon the truth would be revealed in ways that would change how everyone viewed both him and the potential of human soldiers. The final training exercise arrived like a thunderstorm that had been building on the horizon for weeks. All recruits on Battle Station Omega 7 would participate in a massive war game that would test everything they had learned during their months of preparation. The exercise would last for 3 full days and nights, with no breaks or timeouts, as two opposing forces battled for control of different sections of the station. The complexity of the operation was unlike anything the recruits had faced before. They would be divided into 2 armies of several hundred soldiers each, with realistic objectives that required careful planning coordination between different species, and the ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Victory would depend on strategic thinking rather than individual strength or speed. Iho found himself assigned to a reconnaissance team led by Corporal Vex along with Private Yuki and two Vortani soldiers named Braun and Kel. Their mission was to scout enemy positions, gather intelligence about their movements, and relay critical information back to their main force. It was considered a relatively safe assignment, perfect for keeping the supposedly weak human away from direct combat. The team's orders were clear but limited. They were supposed to observe and report without engaging the enemy unless absolutely necessary. Their success would be measured by the quality of information they provided rather than the number of opponents they defeated. This type of mission required patient stealth and careful observation skills that most alien soldiers found boring compared to direct fighting. On the first day of the exercise, the team moved through the station's maintenance tunnels, which provided hidden routes between different levels and sections. These narrow passages were uncomfortable for the larger Vortani soldiers, but allowed the team to avoid main corridors where enemy patrols might spot them. The tunnels were hot, cramped, and filled with the constant noise of machinery that made communication difficult. Yuki used her technical skills to tap into the station's sensor network, giving them real-time information about enemy movements in nearby areas. Her portable computer displayed maps that showed the locations of both friendly and hostile forces, allowing the team to plan their routes carefully. The young Pixian engineer had proven to be invaluable for gathering electronic intelligence. By the second day, the team had successfully mapped several enemy positions and identified their patrol patterns without being detected. Their reports had helped the main force avoid several ambushes and plan more effective attacks against key targets. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned until they discovered something that changed everything. While moving through a section of tunnels near the station's command center, the team detected unusual activity that was not supposed to be happening. According to their briefings, the enemy force had established a major command post in an area that was supposed to remain neutral during the exercise. This gave them a significant tactical advantage that could determine the outcome of the entire wargame. The command center was heavily defended with at least 20 soldiers and multiple automated weapon systems. Any direct assault would require a much larger force than their small reconnaissance team. The position also had excellent communication equipment that allowed enemy commanders to coordinate their entire army from a secure location. Vex wanted to report their discovery immediately and wait for orders from their own commanders. The Kelrax soldier believed that gathering intelligence was their only job, and that attacking such a well-defended position would be suicide for a team of only 5 soldiers. His natural caution was reinforced by military doctrine that warned against exceeding mission parameters. However, Deho quietly pointed out that by the time reinforcements arrived, the enemy would likely have moved their command center to a different location. The opportunity to strike a decisive blow against their opponents would be lost, and the war game would continue for full 3 days with uncertain results. The humans suggested a direct assault on the command center using the maintenance tunnels to approach from an unexpected direction. The plan would require precise timing, perfect coordination, and the element of surprise, but it offered the possibility of ending the exercise with a complete victory for their side. The alien soldiers stared at him in disbelief. A reconnaissance team attacking a fortified position defended by 4 times their number seemed like the kind of suicidal heroics that got soldiers killed in real combat. Vex accused Deho of trying to get them all killed just to prove some ridiculous point about human bravery or stupidity. Braun and Kel, the 2 Vortani soldiers, shook their massive heads and expressed doubt that such a plan could succeed. Their species valued courage, but they also understood the importance of overwhelming force in military operations. 5 soldiers against 20 was not brave, but foolish in their warrior culture. Yuki studied the tactical situation, using her computer to analyze the command center's defenses and calculate the probability of success. Her initial assessment supported the alien soldiers' skepticism since the numbers were clearly against them. However, as she examined the layout more carefully, she began to see possibilities that others had missed. The Young Pixian engineer realized that Daeho's plan actually made tactical sense in ways that were not immediately obvious. The command center's defenses were focused on the main corridors and entrances where they expected any attack to come from. The maintenance areas were poorly protected because most military planners assumed that such narrow spaces could not be used. For assault operations, a small team could potentially reach the center of the enemy position before being detected and create enough chaos to disable their communications and coordination. Even if they could not hold the position permanently, the disruption might give their main force enough advantage to achieve victory in the overall exercise. When Vex continued to refuse consideration of the plan, Daeho made a decision that surprised everyone in the team. He calmly removed his helmet and set down his rifle, then reached into his pack and pulled out items that should not have existed in a new recruit's possession. The other soldiers watched in growing amazement as he revealed equipment that told a very different story about his background. The first item was a combat knife with a worn leather handle and a blade that showed numerous nicks and scratches from real use. The weapon had obviously seen action in genuine battles rather than training exercises. Its condition indicated years of service in hostile environments where such tools meant the difference between life and death. The second item was a small electronic device that experienced soldiers immediately recognized as a military-grade communication scrambler. These devices were restricted equipment that could disable enemy radio networks and were only issued to special operations units for sensitive missions. The fact that Daeho possessed such equipment raised serious questions about his true identity. The third item was a collection of insignia and patches that made Yuki gasp in recognition when she saw them. Her knowledge of galactic military organizations allowed her to understand the significance of the decorations that the human had been hiding. The medals represented commendations for valor in combat, distinguished service awards, and unit citations that few soldiers ever earned. As the alien soldiers stared in shock, Daeho quietly explained that he was not actually a new recruit, despite what his official records indicated. His real name was Colonel Kim Daeho, and he had served in Earth's Special Forces for over 10 years. His military career included 7 major conflicts, dozens of dangerous missions behind enemy lines, and decorations for courage that were among the highest honors his planet could award. The revelation completely changed everything the team thought they knew about humans and their capabilities. The supposedly weak rookie who had endured weeks of mockery and harassment was actually one of Earth's most experienced and decorated combat veterans. His presence at the training station was part of a secret mission that none of the alien recruits had suspected. Vex asked why he had allowed himself to be insulted and humiliated for so long without revealing his true identity. The question reflected the confusion that all the aliens felt about the human's strange behavior during his time at the station. Why would an experienced officer accept such treatment when he could have demanded the respect that his rank and experience? Daeho's answer revealed the sophisticated thinking behind Earth's approach to joining the galactic military community. His leaders wanted to understand how alien soldiers really viewed humans rather than how they would pretend to act if they knew they were dealing with a senior officer. The information he had gathered during his undercover assignment would help prepare future human recruits for the challenges they would face when integrating with alien forces. Now, with the war game reaching its most critical phase, Colonel Kim Daeho offered to show his teammates what human soldiers could really accomplish when they were properly trained and experienced. His plan for taking the enemy command center demonstrated tactical knowledge and strategic thinking that went far beyond anything taught in basic training programs. The transformation in the tunnel was immediate and dramatic. The alien soldiers who had spent weeks mocking the weak human recruit now found themselves face to face with a decorated combat veteran whose experience far exceeded their own. Corporal Vex stared at the insignia in Daeho's hands, trying to process the reality that he had been tormenting someone who outranked him by several levels. Colonel Kim Daeho began outlining his plan for taking the enemy command center with the calm authority of someone who had led similar operations in real combat situations. His voice carried a new confidence that commanded attention and respect from teammates who had previously dismissed everything he said. The detailed tactical knowledge he displayed made it clear that this was not theoretical planning but practical experience. The plan involved using the maintenance tunnels to approach the command center from multiple directions. Simultaneously, Daiho would lead the main assault through the central passage while Yuki used her technical skills to disable their security systems from an auxiliary access point. The two Vortani soldiers would create diversions at opposite ends of the facility to draw defenders away from the primary target. Timing had to be perfect, with each team member playing a specific role that contributed to the overall success of the mission. Daiho explained how similar operations had worked in actual warfare, where he had led teams against fortified positions. Held by superior numbers, the key was using surprise coordination and superior tactics to overcome numerical disadvantages. Vex found himself following orders from someone he had spent weeks insulting and humiliating. The irony was not lost on the Kelrak soldier, who realized that his arrogance and prejudice had blinded him to the truth about human capabilities. The reptilian warrior began to understand that his species' natural advantages meant nothing without the strategic thinking that real combat required. The assault began exactly as planned, with Daiho leading his team through maintenance tunnels that other species would have found too cramped for military operations. His smaller size, which had been mocked as weakness, now became a tactical advantage in the confined spaces. The human moved with practiced silence, using techniques developed during years of special operations missions. When they reached their target positions, Yuki began her electronic warfare assault on the enemy communication systems. Her portable computer interfaced with the station's network, allowing her to plant viruses that would disable their coordination capabilities at precisely the right moment. The young Pixian engineer had never worked with such an experienced operator and found herself learning advanced techniques. The Vortani soldiers, Braun and Kel, created their diversions with enthusiasm that had been missing from their previous training exercises. Working under the direction of a proven combat leader gave them confidence and purpose that transformed their natural strength into effective military action. Their loud attacks drew enemy attention exactly as planned. Daiho used his communication scrambling device to block the enemy's ability to call for reinforcements or coordinate their defensive response. The command center became isolated from the rest of their forces, making it vulnerable to the kind of precision assault that the human had planned. The advanced equipment that should not have been in a recruit's possession proved its worth in less than 20 minutes. The enemy command center was completely neutralized, with most of its defenders captured, and all communication equipment disabled. The operation succeeded beyond the team's wildest expectations, demonstrating tactical brilliance that none of the alien recruits had thought possible from their supposedly inferior human teammate. The loss of their command structure caused complete chaos throughout the enemy forces, as individual units lost coordination and began making tactical mistakes that allowed Daiho's side to achieve rapid victories across the entire exercise area. The war game that was supposed to last 3 days ended in total victory for his forces before the second day was finished. Word of the human's true identity and tactical genius spread through Battle Station. Omega 7, faster than official communications could travel. Soldiers who had mocked Kim Daiho for weeks now sought him out, asking questions about Earth's military techniques and requesting advice on combat strategies. The same aliens who had created insulting nicknames now treated him with the respect due to a decorated officer. Sergeant Talo called Daiho to his private office and offered a formal apology for the treatment he had received during his time at the training station. The massive Vortani instructor admitted that the exercise had revealed serious flaws in how alien soldiers approached combat situations. They had relied too heavily on their natural physical advantages while ignoring the importance of strategy, teamwork, and tactical thinking. The sergeant explained that many alien military leaders had assumed that superior strength, speed, or intelligence would automatically translate into battlefield success. The human's performance proved that experienced leadership and careful planning could overcome almost any physical disadvantage. This lesson would change how the Galactic Defense Force approached training and unit composition. Private Yuki approached Daiho in the equipment room, where she had first begun to suspect his true background. The young Pixian engineer thanked him for showing her what real military leadership looked like her species valued intelligence above all else. But she had learned that knowledge without experience was incomplete. She requested permission to study human tactical methods. Corporal Vex struggled with embarrassment and shame as he realized the magnitude of his mistakes in judgment. The Kelrax soldier had allowed his species' pride and natural arrogance to blind him to obvious signs that the human was far more capable than he appeared. Vex asked why Deho had never shown anger or fought back against the constant harassment and mockery. The colonel explained that a true soldier must be able to endure any hardship in order to complete their assigned mission. Losing his temper or revealing his identity would have compromised his ability to gather accurate information about how aliens really viewed human soldiers. The intelligence he collected would help prepare future Earth recruits for the challenges of integrating with galactic forces. Over the following days, requests poured in from various military units throughout the galaxy asking for human soldiers to